Well, good morning again. It's good to see everybody. My name's Eric. I'm the pastor here, and we're doing this series on neighboring, and somebody said, "Where's my cardigan?" They want me to take my shoes off. They want me to sing a little "Won't You Be My Neighbor" song. And I just want you to know that if there are any secret polls, or not polls, what do you call them? What's the word? Petitions that go around. Nikki Duggan is not authorized to do that, to make me sing a song to you. But I did say, if you learn the song on the piano, maybe we would arrange something. So we are in this series we're starting called The Art of Neighboring. And if you look at this banner that Pastor Phil mentioned just a few moments ago, it has our church's mission statement on it. Love God and love others. And if you've spent any amount of time here at Cornerstone, you know that this is our mission statement. You can find it on our website. Just about every week, Pastor Kermit or Pastor Phil, whoever's up here greeting the congregation, they will mention it. It's in our newsletter. It's all over the place. We talk about it all of the time. And, you know, we find the basis for this mission statement in Matthew chapter 22, where Jesus tells us the greatest commandments. And he says, love God and love others. Now, today, we're going to be looking at a different time in Jesus' ministry where this topic came up and these commandments came up. And this is nice, isn't it? Loving God and loving others. I mean, it has the word love in it. And love, it just makes us feel kind of warm inside, right? Loving is something that we know we're supposed to do. We like having these kind of nice feelings for other people. And when we think about loving God, I mean, that makes sense, right? We should love God. I mean, he is our creator, and we should love him. Moms, you know how this works. How many of you have used that argument with your kids? I had you in my body for 9 months. You will love me. You will respect me. Maybe that's not all the moms in the room. Just my wife has used that a few times, and she does not use it sparingly. That is a regular thing. God created us, right? He gave us life. We should love him. We should appreciate him. We should serve him. We should have these feelings towards him. And the idea of loving others, sure. We love people, right? In general, at least. We love people. We love everybody. Everybody has value. Everyone has been created equal. Or maybe you're like Linus in this Charles Schulz cartoon that I found. I love mankind. It's people I can't stand, right? You're like, love others. That's great. Until we start talking about the individuals, right? What about the individual that cut you off at the intersection before you got to church today? Do you love that person? Or maybe you got cut off in the parking lot and that person is across the room. Do you love them? Right? Do you love that person? What about the person that cheers for a different sports team than you? As a Cubs fan, come on. I know. Do you love that person? Do you love that person? What about the person who's on the opposite end of the political spectrum from you? Now, come on. They vote the exact opposite way you do. They have a worldview that is completely different than yours. Do you love them? What about the person in your neighborhood who's always making way too much noise? They don't clean up their lawn, they do this or that, their kids are obnoxious. You know, do you love those people? What about the radical terrorists, ISIS, the jihadist Muslims that want to destroy our fundamental way of living? Do you love them? Do you love them? What about the guy who had a DUI and crashed into somebody else and took their life? Do you love that person? Or maybe there's that kid that bullied your child. Do you love them, or do you love the parents of that kid? I mean, suddenly when we start talking about this, certainly there's limits to how we should love others, right? Certainly there are limits to who that is extended to and how we love other people. And that's really what this sermon series is all about, in the art of neighboring. And even though we're going to be talking about our neighbors, the people that live next door to us, and even though we're going to be talking about the word love, which kind of seems like this kind of fluffy kind of word, I got to be honest with you, I think this sermon series that we're going to be doing over the next few weeks could be one of the more challenging sermon series that we've walked through, at least recently in our church. And that's because the gospel demands certain things from our life. And it demands us to reevaluate how we live. And my hope and my prayer as we take time in this sermon series, my hope is that as you are challenged with the gospel, that you may even reevaluate some of the fundamental ways that you live your life because you realize that God is calling you to something greater. The question we want to answer today is this: who is my neighbor? This is the same question that a man asked Jesus in our text today in Luke chapter 10. Let's start in verse 25. It says this: On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Now we don't really have any context for this, other than we know that this guy is wanting to test Jesus, and he is called an expert in the law. We can call him a lawyer, although he's not really a lawyer in the sense that we might think. He is an expert in God's law. When Moses, in the book of Exodus, received God's laws, the Ten Commandments from God on the mountain, this is the law that this man is an expert in. So think about this. This man is asking Jesus a question, but he already knows the answer. He already has the answer. He's an expert in the law. He already knows what the response is going to be. So how does Jesus respond? In verse 26, Jesus responds, "What is written in the law?" he said. "How do you read it?" Jesus just turns the tables back on him and says, "Well, you're an expert in the law. Everybody here knows you're an expert in the law. You tell me what it is that you see there first." Just as a side note, if people that you have conversations with at work or at other places have questions about what you believe about something, it's a great way in a conversation to turn that question back on them and say, "Well, why don't you tell me what you think first?" Then you can maybe know how hostile or not that conversation could be. So Jesus does this. What do you say? How do you read it? Verse 27. The expert in the law answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself." Hey, that matches our banner, right? Love God and love others. And in other words, what this man is saying is he's saying, look, well, the way I read the Old Testament law is to inherit eternal life, you have to have a relationship with God. You have to know him and serve him and love him. But you also have to have a relationship with people where you know them and you love them and you serve them. Verse 28, Jesus says, "You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live." Do this and you will live. One more time. Do this and you will live. You see, Jesus is concerned about more than just education. He's concerned about transformation. See, this legal expert, he knew all of the law. He probably had portions, or if not most of it or all of it, memorized. And when Jesus asks him to summarize the law, the guy doesn't even bat an eye. And he just responds, "Oh, it's to love God and to love others." This guy knew all of the information, but he never allowed it to sink in and to change him and to transform him. And the reality is, the difficulty of this series for many of us in this room today is that many of us have been educated beyond our level of obedience. We know more than we've obeyed up to. Right? The issue for us isn't that we need to learn more. We need another lesson or we need another sermon. Those things are helpful. What we need to do is we need to begin to obey. We need to begin to do this, as Jesus says. We need to follow through on the commandment that's been given to us. We need to love God and we need to love our neighbors. The challenge, however, the danger is that many of us are just like this legal expert. Verse 29, this man, this legal expert, wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Like, you got to love lawyers, right? You got to love lawyers. Like, this is the lawyer question. Yeah, Gary, our lawyer over here, he's like, "Amen." He's the only one in the room, right? Only one. I don't know. Sorry, Gary. We love you anyway. We love you. But you got to love lawyers. I mean, when you sign up for a new service on a website or something, you username and your email, what do you have? You have a terms of service. Has anyone ever read a terms of service before you clicked accept? No, I know you haven't. Because if you did, you would still be reading it. They are so long. They never end. But thank you, lawyers, right? That lawyers, they want, who is my neighbor? This is like my son, Parker. If I told Parker, if I gave him some cookies, and I said, hey, share these with your brother, Kent, and Parker had that bag of cookies, and he looked at me and he said, Dad, who really is my brother? Yeah, like, no, you know who your brother is. Give him the cookies. And that's what you want to say to this legal expert. You know who your neighbor is. Why are you asking this question? See, this man isn't asking this question because he wants to know who his neighbor is. He really wants to know who his neighbor isn't. Where's the line? Certainly not the guy that cut me off in the parking lot. Certainly not the guy that had the DUI or the radical group of terrorists that want to kill me. I shouldn't have to love them, right? Where is the line, Jesus? Who do I actually have to love, and who can I just kind of, ignore or just kind of cut off? Jesus responds to this question with a story. It's a famous story. Many of us have heard it. It says this in verse 30. In reply, Jesus said, a man was walking through East St. Louis. He was walking through East St. Louis late at night, and he was all alone. When suddenly a group of thugs came up upon him and beat him up. They took his clothes, they took his money, they took everything he had. They beat him so badly, it was to an inch of his life. And they left him there bleeding out on the ground just to die. Okay, now, obviously, Jesus doesn't say East St. Louis, all right? He talks about this road from Jerusalem to Jericho and these robbers. But it's a similar kind of situation. This road was a very rocky and hilly road. There were caves, and these bandits would hide, and they would look for unwary travelers, especially those who were traveling alone. Most people didn't travel alone on this road. And they find this guy, and they beat him up. But there's a glimmer of hope because someone comes down the road. In verse 31, the pastor of the large local congregation walks up to the scene of this crime. And what does he do? He crosses over to the other side of the street and walks around because he's too busy or he's too afraid. We don't know why, but he decides that he's going to walk around the other side. Certainly the readers of this would have been a little surprised because the pastor, or in this case, as Jesus says, the priest, they should have known better. They know God's law. They know to love God and to love others. And there's a guy that needs help, but the pastor or the priest walks along on the other side of the road. Verse 32, so too, later, a key volunteer in that church, someone that everybody in the community knew, an usher or a Sunday school teacher or a greeter at the door, they walk up and they see the same situation, and just like the pastor, they walk to the other side of the road and they pass by as well. Again, this person should know God's law. They should know to love God and to love others, and this person needs help. Now, for the people that were listening to this story, they were probably trying to figure out what Jesus was going to say next. For the Jewish people, there were basically three groups of people. There were priests, Levites, and then all the rest of the everyday average Jewish people, the people that were not priests or Levites. So it's the priests, the Levites, and the people. So it's very possible that the people that are listening to this story are thinking, okay, a regular Jewish person is going to come up now. And some perhaps were thinking that maybe Jesus is going to say that the regular Jewish person didn't do anything, and that would be just a tragedy. Or maybe the Jewish person will do something, and that's kind of a statement against the religious elite. Or maybe Jesus is going to go in a different direction, and there's going to be a divine intervention, and an angel's going to help. But what Jesus says next would have really probably surprised and shocked the people, would have changed the tone of the story. In verse 33, but a drug dealer walked out of a bar smelling of smoke and alcohol, tattoos all up down his arms. He walked up to the scene. Jesus says, a Samaritan. And the way it's written in Greek, Samaritan is brought to the very beginning of the sentence. It's the very first word. And I imagine a bit of shock and sorrow, maybe even, and remorse as the word Samaritan is heard. Because the Jews and the Samaritans absolutely, they despised one another. They hated one another. You should be aware that Jewish people, they don't eat pork. There's a statement that they would say about people: he who eats the bread of a Samaritan is the one who eats the flesh of swine. Like, to even eat with a Samaritan was just considered to be undefiled. The Jewish people called Samaritans half-breeds. They despised one another. They loathed one another. And so for this poor man, the pastor hasn't helped, the church volunteer hasn't helped, and now this rough guy, this Samaritan, this hated person comes up. This guy's toast. For all they know, the Samaritan is going to kick him while he's down and finish the job. This is what they're expecting. But Jesus continues in verse 33. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. Right here, we see this Samaritan doing a couple of different things. He went to the man, he saw the man, and then he did something about it. And we can't miss the motivation here. What was the motivation? It was compassion. He took pity on him. He had compassion that moved him to action. So listen to the actions that this man took. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. There's 9 or so different verbs, actions, that this Samaritan took on behalf of this man. And these were no small things. He got off of his donkey and put this dying man on it and walked next to the donkey all the way to wherever this lodge was. He took time out of his schedule and out of what he was doing. He invested his own resources, his medicine, and his finances to be able to care for this man. Look, this man didn't just know what needed to be done. He did something about it. All 3 of the other 2 people, rather, that came down the road, they knew what to do, but they did nothing. And Jesus is commending this man because of what he did. Now, Jesus concludes this story with a question in verse 36. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? Now, it's a little subtle, but I don't want you to miss this. There's a different question here on the screen than the question that the man asked Jesus. The man asked Jesus, who is my neighbor? And Jesus says, who was the neighbor? You see, there's a difference in the viewpoint or the opinion or the perspective from the expert in the law and Jesus. For the expert in the law, a neighbor is a noun. It's an object. It's something that I have an obligation to. And where does that end? Who do I have to, who are the objects that I have to care about? But for Jesus, neighbor is a verb. It's something that you do. It's something that you are. Jesus is not concerned with whether you have a neighbor, but he's concerned with whether you are a neighbor or if you're becoming a neighbor. That's the issue here. This isn't about making enemies into friends. It's not about doing something for every single person that you come across. It's not about solving the problems of the world. Being a neighbor isn't about something you inherit. I moved in and now these people are my neighbors. They're my obligations. It's a choice you make. It's a choice you make to help and assist and to love those people that are around you, regardless of their ethnic, religious, economic, or racial differences. It's a verb. It's an action that you have. So Jesus asks the expert in the law this question, and the man responds. The expert in the law replied in verse 37, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus told him, go and what? Do likewise. Notice that this expert in the law, he can't even bring himself to say Samaritan. He can't even acknowledge the ethnicity of this person, but instead he goes, the one who had mercy. I don't know that this guy really had a change of heart because of this, but Jesus implores him, go and do this. Do this. Be like this Samaritan. Jesus' concern is not simply about education, but it's about transformation. Only one person actually did it. In church, this year at Cornerstone Church, we are focusing on loving our neighbors. Now, we are going to be talking this year, throughout this sermon series, and throughout this year, when I use the word neighbors now, we've kind of been talking broadly about loving others, we've been talking about broadly about loving our neighbors, but I do want us to think now, at least for the rest of this message today, when I say neighbors, think about the people that are right next door to you, that are right around you. Now, some of you live in more remote areas, and I'll talk about that in just a second, but I want you to think about the people who are right around you. This year at Cornerstone, we are committed to being a neighbor. And what we're going to do is we're going to do this on both an individual basis, but also on a corporate basis as well. And as your pastor, I am challenging you, and I will go so far as to say I am expecting you to individually do this and to live this out in your own specific neighborhood right where you are. Throughout the year, what we're going to do is we're going to try to keep this in front of us in our announcement video and online. We're going to have different, I hesitate to use the word tasks or jobs for you to do, but we're going to give you ideas for ways that you can love your neighbor. And some of them will be really simple. This month's is super simple. It might be challenging, but it's very straightforward at least. But then we might have some things that are maybe a little bit more difficult. Like in the summer, we may encourage you to invite somebody over for a barbecue that's in your neighborhood. So there's different things that we're going to encourage you to do. And as we do that individually, our church is going to do that corporately. So later in the summer, we'll encourage you to do a barbecue. And what we're going to do is we've identified the names and the addresses of the people that live all around the church in the immediate vicinity, and we're going to send out special invites to just those people, our direct neighbors here as a church, and we're going to put on a barbecue just for them, because we want to be a good neighbor, we want to love our neighbors. So we're going to do this corporately, but there will also be things that we'll encourage you to do individually as well. So what does this Samaritan do, though? Because this will help kind of frame things for us. This Samaritan went to the man, he saw the man, and he served the man. And these are kind of, in a broad sense, the three things that our church is going to do corporately and individually to our neighbors over the course of this year. Some of you may already be in the process of doing this. Maybe you've already, you have a great relationship. You've been living in the same house for a long time and you know your neighbors. Some of us, like me, I might not be leading from the front. I might be like going, "Go team," from the back. But we're going to do this. We're going to serve our neighbors and we're going to love them. So this year, we're going to love our neighbors by doing what the Good Samaritan did. First, we're going to go to our neighbors. We're going to go to our neighbors. We're going to go to our neighbors. Okay, so what does that mean? Some of us, or most of us probably, are really good neighbors in the sense that we neighbor through the blinds, right? Like we crack open the blinds. Oh, look at that. They got a new truck. Great. There's another vehicle they're going to park on the street. And when we have people over, we're not going to have anywhere to park, right? Or great, the kids are home from college. You know what that means. They're going to be a wild party when no one's around. We neighbor through the blinds. Now, some of you, maybe you're not like me and you would never say those things. This is what you do. You crack the blinds and you go, "Oh, Jesus, just bless them. Send someone to them or just make yourself known to them." We close the blinds, we drink our coffee, we think, "I'm a good neighbor," right? I'm a good neighbor. No, we want to go to our neighbors. You'd be like, "Well, Pastor Eric, I'm not perfect. I don't know if I've got what it needs. I don't know if I have what it takes." Look, church, our neighbors don't need us to walk on water, right? They need us to walk across the yard. They need us to walk across the street, to not just drive into our garage and hit the button as fast as we can so we can get down so we don't have to acknowledge them, right? We need to go to our neighbor. Second, we need to see our neighbor. And I don't mean seeing them through the blinds. I mean going up and observing and getting to know them, seeing their life, learning about them, building a relationship with them, seeing their needs. Not just seeing kind of just, when they come and go. If you know when your neighbors are coming and going completely, that's on the verge of being a stalker. Don't do that, okay? But we want to know their needs. We want to know who they are. And then last, once we've known their needs, we want to serve them. This is really active in doing, caring for them, meeting the needs that you see. So how do we start? Well, we have to identify them, right? We have to learn their names. My wife and I lived before we moved here. We actually knew several of our neighbors. Probably the best neighboring we ever did. But there was a guy that lived next door to us who was an older gentleman, and he was deaf. And I could never remember his name, so I just called him Deaf Guy. Hey, I was outside, I saw the neighbor. Oh, who is that? Oh, Deaf Guy, right? And then in another place we lived, there was a girl that was down the street. I think we knew her name, I don't remember it now, but she always wore a SpongeBob SquarePants hat, so we called her SpongeBob. Oh, SpongeBob's outside. Some of you do this. I was talking with the worship team, and one of our worship team players, who's over here playing a guitar, said, lady who washes her car late at night, and stuff like that. You have these kind of names. That's not what I'm talking about. We need to get to know their names. So we got a sheet for you on your chair there, and it has 8 different squares. Okay, so you can kind of think of this as the houses next to you, the houses across from you, and the houses behind you. Now, I live on a cul-de-sac. there are 4 houses on my cul-de-sac. So this doesn't quite, compute exactly, but I'm going to have to, turn the corner down the road and find 4 more houses down there. Some of you live in really, like you don't have a neighbor for a mile or a quarter mile. That's okay. Just 1 or 2 neighbors is fine in that case, because for you to invest in those neighbors is going to take a lot more of your time than it is for me when I drive home and I see my neighbor outside. I can have a quick 5-minute conversation with them. You're going to have to invest more. So don't feel bad if you can't if you don't have 8 neighbors around you. Just figure out the closest one and figure out, scale it to fit where you are. Now, there are 3 blanks on here for each house. The first one is the number A, not the letter A, the number A, the letter A. And this is what I want you to do. I want you to put the name, not SpongeBob, and not, whatever, walking dog guy, not that, but put their names. Now, some of you're thinking, I don't know their name. And this is going to be hard. Yeah, but it's simple. Like there's a challenge. We get to know their names. Write their names down, as many as you can, and then begin to pray for them. This is really all January is about. There are 2 other blanks, but January is all about getting to know their name. Now look, I know it's hard, it's cold, you might not be able to get all of their names this month, but this is the challenge, is to begin to do this. I hesitate to tell you this. I have a friend who he has this great technique for learning people's names after he should know their names. Because some of you are terrified. You're like, I've been living in this house for 30 years and I don't know the guy next door's name. This is like probably not the best way to do it, but I think it's funny, so I'm going to share it with you. He says, hey, what's your name? And they tell them, and he goes, no, I meant your last name. And so then he gets both, right? So, did you catch that? Yeah, I thought that's funny, and maybe you don't. So, it's a little deceptive. I don't know that I would really think that's the best way to do that, but go over and just say, look, I just realized something. I've been living next to you for a long time. I cannot, you probably told me your name when you first got here, but we say hi, but I don't remember your name. Can you give me your name? Or what you can do, my wife just did this when we moved in. She wrote down our contact information and she gave it to them and said, hey, if there's ever just something going on and you need something, here's our information. And if you want to give me yours, that's great. Can you remind me your name? But that's just an open door in a conversation, just to say, here, you can contact us. So A is the name of the person. B, what that is that's a fact about them that you learned from talking with them. A fact that you learned about them when talking to them. Not, they like camping because they have a camper outside their house. Okay, that's not, we're talking about have a conversation with them and learn something about them. And then C, this is like what motivates them. This might be a fear. This might be a passion. This might be a dream of theirs. Now, if you don't know their name, you're probably not going to get to see anytime soon. It may not even be this year that you get to see. Some of you, it's going to take time. Some of your neighbors might be tough nuts to crack. You know what I'm saying? Like they just may be closed off. They may not want to talk to you right away. But this is where we got to start somewhere, right? So start with getting to know their names, all right? This is our object and our goal. Fill out this sheet. So why are we doing this crazy thing about going out and saying hello to our neighbors? Jesus is talking about neighbors in general, but why not apply this to our actual literal neighbors as well? Why do we do this? The answer is very simple. It's because what Jesus did for us. What did the Samaritan do? He went, he saw, and he served. And what did Jesus do? He came to us. He went to us. This is what we just got through celebrating at Christmas. His birth, his arrival here. And when he was here among us as a man, what did he do? He saw and he observed. He recognized our situation. He recognized that just like that man bleeding to death, we were dead in our sins. We were dying. And it wasn't because some group of people beat us up. It was because of our own choices and our own actions that caused us to sin and be in separation from God. We were dying in our sin. So what did he do? He came to us, he saw us in our need, and then he served us. This is what the work of the cross was all about. It was the ultimate sacrificial service for our ultimate problem, which is sin. Why do we do this? Because of the love of Christ. It compels us. Because we love because he first loved us. We recognize how far we've fallen and how much we need his grace and his forgiveness and his love. And so now we go, God, I can't help but love you back. And because you did this for me, I need to go do this for my neighbor, for the people that are around me. You know, as I've been talking today, if you kind of just are a little callous and cold, and if you just have no desire to reach out to your neighbors, maybe you've had some run-ins with them in the past, or you just have something against them. And if you're just totally closed off to this, I'm not in a place to question your salvation, but I would question how much you've really experienced God's grace in your life. Because when you understand how much God's grace and his love and his forgiveness, what that has done for you, that changes you. The petty differences of being a neighbor, he did this or he did that, or the fence, or their stuff is on my lawn, or that stuff goes away when you realize the great amount of offense that you made against God. Jesus is the best neighbor. He came to us, he saw us, and he served us. Have you truly experienced God's grace? So what's our response today? First response is this: find salvation in Jesus. Maybe just as I talked about Jesus, maybe you never thought of Jesus as a neighbor in that way. But I want you to know, if you are lost in sin or separate from God, if you're far from him in any way, maybe you were dragged here today, maybe it's a new year and you said, I should probably go to church, and you find yourself in this place today. I want you to know that Jesus is the best neighbor. Find salvation in him. He's the one that came to us, saw us in our sin, and he served us by going to the cross. And when you believe and confess that he is Lord, and when you call on his name, you will be saved. I'm going to give you an opportunity in just a moment to do that. I'm going to ask you, just between you and me, in just a moment, to raise your hand. If you just say, yeah, Pastor Eric, I want to accept and find salvation in Jesus. But then for the rest of us here, very, very simple, very, very practical for us, that response. If you're a believer in the room today, fill out the block map. Start it. Okay, you probably won't fill it out completely, but fill out that block map that you have and put it on your refrigerator. Maybe put it on the side so that if your neighbor actually comes over, they don't see that and be like, hey, creeper, why is my name on your refrigerator, okay? But put it somewhere where you can see it. Fill it out, and this month, begin to pray for them. You may not know their names, but pray for them. Pray for Blue House guy, right? Or ugly paint job guy, right? Pray for guy leaves his trash out all the time guy. Begin to pray for them. Find out their names, but start it. We have the week of prayer this week. This week at our week of prayer, we're going to have the addresses out of all these different things, of all these different homes in our area. It's like 200, I forget exactly. It's been a couple weeks since I actually looked at the total. It's like 270 names, addresses that are right in our immediate vicinity. 270 addresses that are directly around our church. We're going to be praying for these people as a church, but also be praying for those as individuals in your own areas as well.